Thanks, Brian. Thank you for doing this second session. So today we are seeing Sonnets 116. So we will start with that. So please, you can take us through the sonnet.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe I can just give a brief introduction. So we talked a lot of things last time about Shakespeare in our time, and then we want to start looking at Shakespeare. So of course, most of Shakespeare is plays. That's what he's known for. But of course, the plays are very often in poetry. But before he wrote the plays, he wrote quite a bit of poetry because the theater itself went through different eras of legality and illegality in Elizabethan times. It would be there when it would be very popular, it would be closed down, then it would be open again. So that's a whole different story. But anyway, in the earlier parts of Shakespeare life, he wrote quite a bit of poetry. Now, as I talked about before, what you had in England was the English attempt to have a Renaissance, which was the movement of kind of rebirth of classical learning in the Christian civilization that usually is said to have taken place in the 1400s in Italy. England, of course, was looking to Italy for inspiration for their own. We want to have our own Renaissance. And the Renaissance from Italy slowly moved north and north and north. And one of those important points was the founding of the grammar schools in England, which we might all well known if we were part of the British Empire, because that was the typical British education. But that actually grew out of the Renaissance, because the Renaissance, the Italians called the movement, when people ask them, what is this rebirth? What is this Renaissance that you're doing in Italy? And they say, well, it's humanism. They had this term humanism. And when people ask, well, what is humanism? They say, well, it's essentially a love of language. The essence of humanism means to show human beings to have a great dignity through language. So it was very much about language and grammar and creating new words and creating a new creativity and worship and joy in language. So when some of the British monks, and monks were mostly the scholars at places like Oxford in those days, they asked some of the great Renaissance masters of Italy, like Marsilio Ficino, we want to have a Renaissance in England, like you have in Italy. So what can we do? And Ficino's answer was teach grammar, teach language. And so that was the genesis of the idea in England, which grew up to the 15th century, of the grammar schools. And one of the first grammar schools was in Stratford-upon-Avon. So Shakespeare was probably one of the first young men who actually went to one of these new grammar schools, which were based upon a new relationship to language and particularly classical learning and classical culture. So that, by the time Shakespeare got around to around 1600, when Shakespeare became very active, language had become this tremendous exploration in England. Because don't forget, Old English is more like German. Its basis is the Germanic languages, but gradually it was taking in more and more Latin from the classical culture. And by the time modern English was born, around Shakespeare's time, most of the aristocracy spoke French. And they wanted to have their own English language that wasn't just French, but also was English. So let's invent a language. And that's why in Shakespeare's time, to be a poet was to bring this whole new language into being. And that's why Elizabethan English and Shakespeare's English is so rich. It's got such a vast vocabulary because it brought all of this world of the Romance languages of Greek and Latin into the whole Germanic world of the Northern European languages. And that marriage created the language that Shakespeare wrote in. And also the world of the theaters, where the new playwrights be coming up with new words, just like composers or musicians come up with new melodies and new songs. And that's why the vocabulary in Shakespeare's time was so vast. But let's keep in mind, this wasn't a literary culture yet. This was purely an oral culture, perhaps like the ancient Indian culture, where it was memorized, but there wasn't a dictionary saying, here's proper words, this is an English word, this is not an English word. There wasn't grammar laid out as a kind of system, which people like Samuel Johnson did in the 17th century. But in Shakespeare's time, it was more creative world, where people could create words and banter and create new forms of being through language. So it's important to keep that in mind. So that energy came into the English world. And of course, the two great texts were probably, again, the King James translation of the Bible, which was a little towards the end of Shakespeare's life, and of course, Shakespeare's play itself. And so all of this was so powerful that became the language of all the later British civilization, including the British Empire, and therefore the global language. Though in recent years it's kind of taken a more American turn. But it's this kind of language that had its inventive phase in Shakespeare's time. And the drama of the plays, of course, was the major part of it, but it started with the poetry. And although there's the long poems like Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece, which we can talk about later, the Shakespeare myth and how important those are, something really special happens with these 154 sonnets that Shakespeare wrote. Now, the sonnet itself was a classical form. It again, when they looked back to the masters of Italy, Orlando Tasso and Petrarch, they wrote a form called the sonnet. And so that many people in the 16th century before Shakespeare, like Philip Sidney, were trying to write sonnets, copying Petrarch and Tasso, these great sonnet composers of the classical Italian world. But they found that it didn't quite fit this new language of English. So they came up with their own sonnet form. And the history goes that when the theaters got closed because of health issues in the plague, Shakespeare took a few years off and under the tutelage of some kind of country lord, wrote these 154 sonnets, this cycle of sonnets. And each sonnet has the exact same form. It's alternate rhyming. There's 14 lines, and 12 lines have alternate rhyming, and the last 2 lines rhyme after each other. And they all are in the basic beat that almost all of Shakespeare's poetry is in, which is called iambic pentameter. That's later when people measured the rhythms of particular kinds of languages. So iambic pentameter, the basic beat of the English language is da-dun, 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 like that. To be or not to be, that is the question. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments, right? So the sonnet is 14 lines with alternate rhyming and final sequential rhyming in that rhythm, in that 10 beats. So it gives a very simple and yet quite nicely complex form to work with. So that was the outer form that then Shakespeare took that and wrote this very interesting cycle of sonnets. Any questions so far? Is that quite clear? Just as a little history to where we stand with the sonnets?
One thing that popped in my mind is the word poesis. You have mentioned it earlier, and you also mentioned that bringing into existence things that are not, bringing things into existence. So, is that why it is called poesis? Poetry? Is that any connection?
Poesis, yes. Poetry. Oh, go back to that. Yes. Well, of course, that is the classical philosophy, which was kind of mixed with Christianity and rediscovered in the Renaissance. It was there in the Arab world, but the Christian world had totally lost Plato and lost most of Aristotle. So when Plato and Aristotle came back, they talk a lot about poesis and techne and all these words that are still very important today. And poesis in Greek generally meant making of anything. Poesis means to make, it's the word to make in ancient Greek. But the highest form of making, according to Plato and Aristotle, is poetry, because that creates the language structures and therefore the mental structures by which new things can come into being, right? And of course, they weren't, in their view, poetry was the human touching the divine, and the divines, the muses, the goddesses who would sing forth all of the sounds of heaven. The poet would get in touch with that, and then in the frenzy of poesis, he'd pour forth this huge epic, poetic structure. And that would give all sorts of new names and new energy to the culture. So poesis refers to all making in ancient Greek thought, but the highest making, the most important form of making, is poetry. Yes, exactly, Jasper. So, and that was there in the Renaissance. So people like the young Shakespeare saw themselves as if they were poets and they had a gift for language and a gift for poesis, they were the makers of the new English culture, the new English civilization, just as Tasso and Petrarch and Dante and so on had been the great poets and makers of the Italian Renaissance. They would be the makers of the English Renaissance. And probably, of course, Shakespeare became the most masterful example of the English poet. His influence was so huge that all the poetry of English civilization afterward looks up to Shakespeare as a kind of someone who set the bar so high. How can we, compare? But yes, an important point to keep in line, particularly from Plato's Meno dialogue, is that the poet isn't creating poetry out of his own resources. He has a gift in which he gets in touch with the muses and they pour forth the divine inspirations into him, and he can say incredible things. So a lot of the modern scholarship on, oh, how did Shakespeare have a life experience to write all this poetry? Well, from their point of view, you didn't need experience to write poetry. Poetry is something that's simply a gift. And why the gods gift one person and not another person is the god's mystery. It's not something that human beings can figure out through psychology or something like that. So Shakespeare could have been just a simple landowner, even a businessman, like the typical histories say, and still have had the gift to write all this extraordinary poetry that he did. So interesting question about that, the whether great art comes from experience or some kind of mysterious gift that the whole life comes towards. So yes, poesis, very, very important as this kind of making in poetry as the highest making. Very good to keep this in mind with the classical culture and Shakespeare.
It's very important. It's also relevant because you brought this thing that they wanted their new language. They wanted to invent, and they wanted to be free. They wanted to invent their own nice and doing that through language, and that brings our attention to language. And language is so important. I mean, I feel the every day we wake up to read the news and what people are saying, and it influences us, influences our day. It's still alive. The same thing is still alive.
Absolutely. You know, what kind of language is new? Is news? Is news poetry? Does news take us into a place of new discovery and new being, or is it just make us frustrated? So there's many kinds of language, and in Shakespeare's plays as well, if we get into it, we'll see there's news, there's gossip, there's all the kinds of language that human beings use. But in the sonnets, particularly, he's being the poet, whatever that is. He's not presenting a whole drama of life which holds a mirror up to nature. He's taking poetry in that essential form as the gift of the essence of language and the essence of making for the whole culture, setting the intellectual boundaries of what we can understand and what we can't understand. This is the task of the poet, I think, according to Shakespeare.
And why did you choose Sonnet 116, Brian? Is there any reason? Do you like it personally, or?
It's easy to start from there because it's not only one of his most famous sonnets, but it's one that translates very well. There are certain sonnets that, of course, when you read them closely, you find all sorts of remarkable things. But in our age and our time, a lot of those thoughts are too deep or too foreign or too mysterious for us to understand well. Whereas this sonnet has been so famous that I would say it actually has influenced so many other writers and thinkers that it's very clear to us. A lot of the way of the poetry of our time is bound to this sonnet. I would put it, that fully. Like, when you take, say, a great work of art in the West, like, say, Mozart's opera, The Marriage of Figaro, that whole work had such an astonishing sonic signature on everyone who ever heard it that a lot of the music afterwards has echoes of it. If you ever hear Figaro and listen to it very closely, you'll hear all sorts of things which popped up in all kinds of music afterwards. So these great works of art really inform how people coming afterwards and artists coming afterwards think. Just like we were talking about the influence of, say, Hayao Miyazaki's films in Japan. It's an alphabet. Yes, yeah. It's not. Yeah. Yes, it becomes an alphabet. So I think Sonnet 116 is one that not only rings very clear to our current ear, but it's actually created the way we listen in part. There's something about this sonnet that has been very destined. Just like some of Shakespeare's plays are extremely popular, other ones aren't very well known for various other reasons. Yeah, so that's why I chose Sonnet 116. And you can look at the sonnets in any sort of way. I mean, part of the beauty of poetry, as Aristotle opposes to techne, he counterbalances poesis versus techne, and says there's these two general ways the mind approaches things. And techne is a kind of ordering or a kind of problem solving, and poesis is creation. And ordering and problem solving thrives on precision and balance and form, whereas poetry bodies forth the meaning of things or the experience of things, so things can mean many things at once. We're not trying to find one meaning. In this poetry, these sonnets, we can look at them in many, many different ways. And you'll find if you read all of the sonnets from number 1 to number 154, they do have an extraordinary single arc and a single story in them. And yet, the narrator, the voices change through them. So it can also seem like they're totally disjointed, like somebody wrote just a whole bunch of different things and then put them together in a book. And you'll find the same things with Shakespeare plays. They both work as individual dramas, but they also work as one great, what someone has called, Ted Hughes, the poet Ted Hughes, has called the monomyth, this great arc of a single story from the Two Gentlemen of Verona all the way to The Tempest, which is his last play. So we can pick out Sonnet 116 and just see what we make of it. But also, if you ever read the whole of the sonnets, you'll find it does have this very interesting progression. Shall we dive in then and look at the Sonnet 116?
Absolutely. We will start with
Absolutely. I know we've both read it before. We already know things about it and so on. But that's what I wanted to show a bit, and how fruitful it is, particularly in our time, to look very closely at Shakespeare. Just read it and puzzle over it together. Perhaps like two people who share the same language but have never met, and they've never read this before. They don't know who it's by. They know nothing about Shakespeare, anything. They just find this piece of paper somewhere and say, hey, what's this? This is interesting, and read it as if it were anonymous. This is a great way to approach Shakespeare, to clear the mind, so we can just puzzle over, what it is. And if it's very simple and obvious, then we'll have no problem. But otherwise, we can find all sorts of interesting things in it. So I thought we could start with that. Why don't we start with the reading the 14 lines of the sonnet, and I'll read one line and you read the next line. We'll just alternate.
Yeah.
We'll just read it out loud. Then we'll go back and start puzzling over what those lines may mean.
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
Sonnet 116, I'll start with the first line, you take the second. So are we ready?
Yes.
So I'm starting with the first line. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments.
Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds.
Or bends with the remover to remove.
Oh no, it's not an ever fixed mark that looks on tempest and is never shaken.
It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken.
Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come.
Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom.
If this be error, and upon me prove, I never writ, nor no man ever loved.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's take the first line then. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. So this sets the whole beginning of this little work of art in our minds. So what does that mean? Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments.
If you're asking me this question,
What's the first? Yeah, let's just, what does that mean?
I think it means that let me not put a spanner in, bungle something that's going on fine, that's getting along fine. That's what
right.
I think.
Let me not. Who is me?
Well, if I have to reason it out, the me is a mind that is not informed or hasty.
Right. Oh, so you're thinking that the me is someone who might interfere.
Yes.
With the marriage of two minds, right?
Yes,
so he's
yes.
telling himself, like, let me.
Yeah.
That's let me, as if, yeah, interesting. So this me, whoever this me is someone who might admit impediments. He might admit to allow or admit blocks to whatever the marriage of true minds may be. Interesting. Yes. Oh, I like that, Jasper. So in that sense, maybe the me is someone, would the me be someone who's capable of jealousy or capable of, doing something untrue, right? So yes, that highlights then that let. It's kind of a prayer almost, isn't it? Let me not.
Yeah.
Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. So this word marriage, we obviously know marriage, of course, as in two people coming together.
Yeah.
What's the marriage of true minds mean to you? I guess that means there's also false minds. But what is the marriage of true minds?
I think anything that comes from truth, this marriage can happen within a unit, not between two units. Like, for example, if I have to write or do something, I think there are two components that come into play. They marry, and there is a response to it. If I have to discipline myself, that decision also comes from two parts within myself, which marries together to bring about something. And I mean, I always see myself like that. Like there is always a set, there is a lower self, an uninformed or hasty mind, which comes in, puts a spanner in. It's lazy, it procrastinates, it's
Okay.
lying, it's not true. I think it's just straightening out oneself or meditation, prayer. That's how I see this.
No, that seems very good. So I see the lower mind, the hasty mind, as you say, the interfering mind is there, but we also have this true mind, right?
Yeah.
And that this is setting it up in an interesting way where it's not the marriage of true minds, because the me of the poem is outside. He's witnessing, it seems like, the marriage of true minds happening in some other quality, and let me not interfere with it. So I find it very interesting. There's this three-way drama going on here, just the beginning of this poem.
Yeah.
He's not saying, let my true mind not be interfered with by my false mind.
Yeah, he's not
Right?
saying
He
that.
doesn't say that.
In the essay that you sent, it was fabulous. Thoroughly enjoyed the essay, and it was beautiful. It says any text should be subjective. You have to bring yourself in the story. You have to bring yourself into the poem. It is the story of yourself. You're reading yourself. I mean, I don't know why I always tend to read anything that way. So that's how I read this. So that's why I think this marriage is within myself.
Right. Yes. Well, yes. So of course, that raises the question of what's in yourself and what's out of yourself. What is the world and what is the self? I'm not saying we have the answer, but that's another interesting way to look at it. Yes, we'll definitely look at that essay later when we look at Hamlet. I think that's a good idea. It's a great essay, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, with this one, okay, we're just throwing different things out there. It helps with, like I say, Shakespeare to go very slow. Just these in good poetry, just the tiniest adjustments of grammar. It's like in good music. The tiniest difference from one note to another note can completely change whether the piece of music is a masterpiece or whether it's something that's not that interesting. Amazing that way. And obviously Shakespeare has this quality. So yes, but I totally with what you're saying. There's something about this high mind, and that involves this word marriage. Marriage, a very important English word, obviously, and particularly the marriage of true minds. Let me not admit impediments to the marriage of true minds. So he reverses the language that way. And impediments, like you say, is you use the other phrase, throw a spanner in the works. So it's as if the true mind is coming together in its own energy.
Yeah.
Maybe that's another line that this tells us straight off, that true minds automatically come together. So unless I come in and interfere, impede, and impeding doesn't even mean block, does it? It's like I don't think you can block the marriage of true minds, but I can impede it. I can slow it down. I can trouble it, right? That seems to be the character of this me, which you were saying is perhaps this lower self. That it may be, but truth itself has a kind of gathering power, the marriage of true minds, like just what that means. And there's almost a prayer, let me, as my lower self, not interfere with that happening, with that process, right? And one other thing I've spotted, usually the first line of a sonnet has a comma, and often the alternating lines, sometimes there'll just be one line with a full stop, or there'll be two lines, or there'll be three. The full stop sometimes won't come after the couplet, or you get the first stanza of 4 lines. This one, there's a full stop at the end of the first line, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments, full stop. Then suddenly the second line, we move on to love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds. And then a comma, meaning it comes on to the next thought. So it's also very helpful for us to pay attention to punctuation, even punctuation, because punctuation is the rhythm, it's the beat, it's the flow of one thought into another. But it seems like this first thought, let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments, full stop means that stands alone as one thought. There's a rest. And then we begin the thought that flows after that. The poet says, love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds. Anything about that line that comes to you?
Flows from the first line, from the first thought, because I started thinking like this. I always, as I told you, I'm always self-applying the text. Philosophy is the science of assigning values. Like, I mean, I don't know. I think it was Manly P. Hall or someone who wrote this. I don't know, but this is a quote I read, that if there is a chance for me to go out and do something else, which is much more maybe gives me immediate gratification, instant gratification. I'm happy doing that than sitting down and learning poetry or doing something craft or getting my hands dirty and creating art. When I love this, I will take that pain and go through that. I will not let the other thing that is very attractive at the moment to distract me. So my love for thing, love is not love, which alters when its alteration finds. This is what I think. Like when I have a chance to, maybe that's the test of love. Maybe that's how, if I know that if I truly love what I'm.
Yes, yes, love it. Then my love does not alter when it alteration finds. Yes. Very, very, very good, Jasper. Yes. I think that's exactly it. When you dedicate yourself to something that you love, it meets alteration, things that change, they alter, and yet itself does not alter. So we've now, the poet is setting up this relation of something that's fixed or something that stays, does not alter, with something that does alter. And perhaps that was echoing back to what you said about the first line, that you felt there was this lower mind, which the me, which can impede the marriage of true minds. So I see how you said flows from that. But it's interesting. So it does a double negative. So it's quite interesting. We get this first line, then love is not love. Yeah. Just take that bit in itself. It's kind of an interesting phrase. Love is not love. What does it mean to say love is not love? And someone might say, well, I think love is whatever I want it to be. But someone is saying love is not love. Like that's not truly love, right? So this links back to the word true. There's a love, and then there's a true love, maybe. Yes. So it's again creating this two levels of meaning, as you were saying about the first line. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds. So that feeling that where we like, maybe that's liking or fancy, I think is the word Shakespeare likes to use. We fancy something, but when fancy meets alteration, it alters as well. Mm. So we're getting a counter definition here. Whereas love, when it meets alteration, doesn't alter. So interesting, right? It stays in some way. Whereas fancy, or perhaps in our days we'd say more commonly liking, you like something, it only lasts until it meets alteration, then it alters.
Yes.
Right? Yes. Is that helpful to look at these? We'll keep your idea of the two layers.
Yeah.
I think the poem sets up that, doesn't it? The true minds versus the non-true minds. The love that is not love, the alteration which alters. And then he flows on to the next line with a comma, not a full stop, or bends with the remover to remove, and then a full stop. Okay, so the second thought, which alters when it, love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Stop. There's the pause. Yeah. So, what's your sense of the word remove? How do we use that in the modern sense? What is it to remove something?
Well, it could remove the force of the marriage, the strength of the marriage. Like, for example, I just said...
you're linking it to that.
Yeah, that is the impediment, is how I see that, Because I mean, this is my experience. I don't know, I have a monkey mind. I start many things. I go, I'm not very faithful in this marriage, I think. I love one and I love another and I love another. And so, yeah, that's how I see it. So.
Well, yeah. So, yes. So what? Okay, he says, or alters when it alteration finds, or bends. What is it to bend? What's the quality, the human quality of bending?
To give in? Is that what it is?
Bending is kind of an alteration, I guess. I guess I'm thinking of stooping.
Okay.
Is love like some high thing which stoops down? But love does not alter, and love does not bend or stoop. So is there a background image here of love being something upright, or
I think
what's another meaning?
I think this love he's talking about is very upright. I think this love is powerful, very pure, this poesis that brings something to life, that is creating. And so I think that it's upright. That's how that's what I felt when I read this.
Right, interesting. Am I going too far here in linking bending to a marriage? In the marriage ceremony, you bend down, do you not, before the priest? I mean, I could be running off the wrong way with that. Bending. I'm trying to get. The second line strikes me well. The third line, I don't feel the words quite fully. So there's a remover. It bends with the remover to remove. So the remover, there's a being who removes.
Yeah.
So that move to move and re means to do again, to move again. So the bends with the remover to remove. So okay, love is very upright. You've said that. I think that's totally clear. And yet it's something that's apart because there's something else called the remover who removes things. Interesting. I just find that very curious. Maybe remove, as you were saying, well, actually you remove impediments, don't you? But still, love does not alter when an alteration finds and does not remove. He doesn't change things. And that's like a bending act. So whoever this remover is, he's a bender. I can put it that way. Yeah, the quality of this word to bend. Or I guess to bend is to change in a way, is it not too? Like you think of a straight bar or a straight twig, and then you bend it.
Yeah.
And it can remove, and its shape, it loses its shape, right? So it's something, again, we're back in this realm of bending, alteration. And love is something that comes along with us, it's implied, and yet it won't bend with the remover to remove. So that creates a second thing, that to remove something requires a remover. It requires an actor who does the act of removing. And yet love is something that doesn't have to or will not participate in this action. I mean, I'm just trying to think. So what's a negative? What's a removing? Like I remove truth? Could you do that?
Yes.
Or I remove your money from your wallet?
Yeah, you can remove the intensity of the marriage. You can remove the intensity of the marriage. You can remove the intensity of the love.
Yes.
You can remove
yes.
The posture, even the posture.
Posture. Yes, let's keep that idea. The posture. Yes. Posture is important in this poem. You're right. Very interesting. Okay, anything else on that, or should we move on?
Yes. So far, this is what I've understood. So.
Okay, and I mean, what's interesting about the next line is it starts with "oh no" and an exclamation point. Now, exclamation points are very rare in the sonnet. So the very fact that the line starts off with an "oh no," I mean, my view, thinking of it, is that really brings out that this is a kind of praise, a worship of love, right? It's like, oh no, don't even think, that alters. Love is something which alters when it finds, or it bends. These are almost like disgusting thoughts for to the voice, to the writer, to the me. He's got a kind of worship of love, right? So he's setting love up as some great high thing, is he not?
Yeah.
And it's not coming down, it's not bending. Yes. And obviously the marriage of true minds is equivalent to love. So maybe we could, in this poem, love, our singular word, one way we could speak of it is the marriage of true minds. Interesting way to speak of love. Not necessarily the marriage of man and woman or the marriage ceremony, because those minds may not be true at all, right? Yeah. So I like this, oh no, very unusual in the sonnets to say something like that at the beginning of a whole line. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. And then we've got a semicolon. So let's just look at that. I guess the marriage of true minds, love, it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. So this, what do we have there?
Well, this intention, this posture becomes the star, the guiding star, the guiding principle. This is the principle. This is the first and foremost of
the principle, right?
Of existence, of
the principle
everything.
Of existence. Yes, it's ever fixed, and it looks on tempests. But unlike the tempest shakes everything, but this ever fixed mark does never shakes.
This sonnet reminded me of this beautiful song by Leonard. It's called "There Ain't No Cure for Love." There is no cure for love. All the rocket ships are climbing to the skies. Holy books are open wide. The doctors working day and night, but they'll never ever find a cure for love. The sonnet reminded me of that song. Beautiful.
It's got that, doesn't it? Yes. So it's a worship of love. And here's this whole world that shakes. Tempests alter us and shake.
Yeah.
We bend with the remover to remove. We make impediments. And yet love is something that there's no cure for. It's just sitting there, like forcing us to worship it almost and to love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's an ever fixed mark.
Yeah.
Yes, a mark. What does this word mark mean to you? He brings that in now, an ever fixed mark.
My father was a sailor. He was in the merchant navy. These people who go into this open, vast spaces, they need mark. They need a mark to guide them back to shore. And I think this mark is that, because and he's also using the word tempest, which is very, I mean, you can use it in the context of sailing and ocean and storms.
Sailing,
And,
yes. Yeah, the
yes.
sailing is coming in, yes.
And definitely,
Right.
we're all sailors.
Very good.
And
So we need it, yes. So the sailors are trying to get to their destination, which is their mark, and tempests are blowing them about, yes. But they need to know, they need to pass through the storm. Good, yes. So now we have an introduction of these one way to look at a nautical metaphor. It is ever fixed mark. I'm just interested. He's not saying it's an ever fixed principle, but a mark. It's something that we're towards. So he's both worshiping it and saying, "Oh no, it's none of this altering stuff," but it's an ever fixed thing that we're also being pulled towards, right, or that we're aiming towards, right. So it's the very ground of who we are as well, right. That's what he's claiming.
There is this wonderful joke which Seinfeld, Jerry Seinfeld. Have you heard of Jerry Seinfeld?
Yeah. I really like the Seinfeld show.
He talks about why do people have the photographs of their families on their desk when they go to work in their office desk. It's like a mark, like you have to work, you have to go back there, not somewhere else. That's a mark.
Yes.
It kind of something guides you back to your place or safety or your sanctuary.
I see. Yes. We want it. Yeah. Even as you say, the family can be your mark, but that's your dedication. Because of the family, when your family becomes boring, you don't leave them, right? When they alter, you don't alter. You protect them. You serve them. You take care of them.
Yeah.
So that's his quality of love, which somehow grounds this unstable me that we started with. Yeah. Okay. So the nautical metaphor carries along that looks on tempests and is never shaken. Semicolon. So that's a slight pause. It's not a comma, but it's not a full stop either. But it's another thought linked even more closely to the previous thought. It is the star to every wandering bark. Of course, Shakespeare uses that phrase a lot, but of course a bark is a piece of wood from a tree, right? And it falls into the water.
We ourselves
can be a bark. Yes. So the nautical metaphor, so both the sailor and the bark which is broken off the tree, maybe there's the tree of life and the piece of bark is broken off and floats in the water. That can be this me as well. And the water reflects a star. Now he's brought in the star. So that now we're back to this metaphor of the high, and where it does not bend. The star doesn't bend down to remove anything. It's a star up above that is the mark. Yeah. It is the star to every wandering bark. So barks wander. That's the thing we do. It floats about in the water, or the ship moves about on the sea. Quite with you. And like you said with your father, of course, at Shakespeare's time, they weren't using GPS. They were navigating by the stars, right? Yeah. The star would steer you to your destination above the sea. So this brings this heavenly picture seems to be something that's fixed and repetitive, while the seas of fate, you don't know what's going to happen. You might have a tempest, you might be calm, you might have no wind, you might have too much wind, you might have a whale. So it, as love, the marriage of two minds, is the star to every wandering bark. I think this follows exactly what you were saying before. And then this next line is interesting. Yes. Whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. So how does he move? What's this thought he flows into here? It's a star, but what is the worth of the star? Whose worth is unknown? Is that a star? Is a star's worth unknown?
I think so. I think that we give words to things, this guiding things, we mark it, but I think there is things go beyond it. The idea of anything, of love, of work, of family. I think it is beyond our conception. Although what we understand is enough for us to get there or find meaning, there is more to these things that we experience or take for granted. That is
Very
what I
good
feel.
point. Yes, I see. It's interesting that we said, oh no, he's kind of worshiping this love, and it's ever fixed, and it's not this world of alteration. It's the star that guides us and everything, and yet its worth is unknown. Interesting. I mean, it's almost like, is it not saying that love has all of this power, this certainty, this attraction, the pictures on the desk, and yet we don't quite know its worth. Yet we do it. Like we're forced to,
Yeah.
our being is forced to this kind of non-altering fixed mark, and yet its worth's unknown. Although his height be taken, yet the height we understand, it's very high.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet we don't exactly know what it means. Is that we know that it's the star to our whole, it's everything that we're fixed on, but we don't actually know its worth, which I find interesting. Though obviously what he's meaning by the word worth is important here. Is he implying worth is obviously in the value, as a value or money? Worth is also linked to the word work, meaning we
Yeah.
don't, like you were saying, we don't actually know what this thing we call love is, though
Yeah.
it guides us.
Yeah.
Its very fixedness guides us. I'm just reflecting on this interesting whose worth's unknown. Why it's almost like before we know what love is, we know that it's the thing that's fixed us, that guides us, that pulls us. It's the marriage of two minds. And now suddenly he's saying, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Height be taken. Taken mean to take, very basic English word, means to receive, yes? Or to, we look up at the stars, the obviously image. He's casting an image there. It's high up above us.
What does he mean by height here? Like when he says height, does he talk about
Height.
the
Yeah, I was simply thinking the star is way up in the sky. We don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Yet it's beautifully, it guides towards. So it's height. And of course, that goes back to the bending of the third line or fourth line. And you were talking about, there's something about love that's upright, and even the marriage of true minds feels upright. But we don't have to have an answer to that. But if you have anything else to say, I find it's interesting why he's going into the worth of it, whose worth's unknown. Although we know it's very noble and very high, we don't exactly, we're not capable of knowing it.
What comes to my mind is, although his height be taken, is this dedication to the true love, this faithfulness to the true love takes us to great heights. It takes us to heights. It elevates us. It elevates our mind. It elevates our self-worth, whatever. And then what follows also kind of resonates or validates this thought, because it says, but then whatever you think that you have reached, it is beyond that, perhaps, like, oh yes, you came from point A to point B, but then this is beyond that. I mean, in all the riches of the world. And
so that goes a little back. I think it's linked to what you said in the first phrase, where like you do something for love. We were looking at the first line, and you do it. You don't necessarily do it for some lesser reason. You do it because you love doing it. You don't alter when you alteration find. And yet, when you do things for that reason, in a certain way, you start to move apart from, say, the merchant, who maybe will work this hard in order to get this much money to get something else, right? Maybe the singularity of love in that it causes you to do something where perhaps there's no profit in it.
Yeah.
And yet you're doing it anyway. Isn't that the case, right?
Yes.
So that therefore it won't alter. Like for a merchant, as soon as the profit disappears, he disappears.
Yes.
He looks for something else where he can make profit, right?
Yes.
So maybe the worth is a bit looking in that light as well. This world of worth, worthiness, wealth, of things that give us pleasure, give us strength or power or acquisitiveness. And yet love makes us do mad things. It makes us do something for a reason that's not necessarily worthy at all. I mean, very often, like if you do something and because you love it so much and you're not getting any money, you're not getting any power, people can think you're crazy, right? They say, well, what does that get you?
Yeah.
You've worked all day because you love polishing bamboo. Yeah. And yet, polishing bamboo doesn't give you rice. It doesn't give you food. It doesn't give you anything. Why are you doing this? So maybe what's appearing here is the kind of height of love and its difficult madness compared to things down here. right, to this world of impediments.
What I think, what it talks to me is that this love that you are dedicated to could give you the heights. I mean, that it can take you places, but the truth of this love, the power of this love, the purity of this love lies beyond all the riches, the wealth, all the riches that it brings to you. Because when the next line it says, "Love's not time's fool, the rosy lips and cheeks within his bending
Okay, yeah,
sickles
but let's.
compare." Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Well, we can. Why don't we look at the next line yet? Because you've moved us out of that. Okay, good. So now we've got a full stop again. So now we're in this next stanza where suddenly it's love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle compass come. So yes, carry on. You were thinking.
I think Shakespeare here is talking to us or comparing the lower self with this higher love. It says, "You lower self would think that you have been true to this love and you have gained these riches, but do not think that love is all about these rosy lips and cheeks which it brings to you. It's not just about those things. It is not
Right.
the time's fool. It is beyond all of that. It
Or
is
time's
timeless.
fool. Yes,
Yeah. It is timeless and it's
timeless.
beyond
Okay,
time.
so the me is something is the we who this me is time's fool. What do you
Yeah.
think of this phrase time's fool? Love is not time's fool, but what is time's fool? Yeah, capital T, by the way. So he's not saying time with a small t, capital T. So
Yeah, it's
time is a kind
time's
of
fool.
character or a god, or what is time?
I think he is
Time's
talking about
fool.
time itself, which has the power to change things because time is powerful.
Change. Good. Time is change. Time has changed. The world of change as opposed to the world of eternity.
And
So
this lower self is always worried about this time that we are living in. In this lifetime, I have to achieve things. And then I might even be a charlatan saying that I love truly. And I think, I'm getting all of this because I love truly. But then Shakespeare reminds us that, well, it's not that. It's you. Even though you take all the heights, you go to all this or experience all this glory, but this true thing that guides you is beyond this time. That's how I see it. That's how it speaks to
right.
me.
So you're saying then that in a way we are time's fools,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
We're in this world of change,
yeah,
and that's fool. There's something foolish about that. It's a fool, and a fool is a very interesting word in Shakespeare. You use it as so many different meanings are wrapped up in that word fool. It's not just stupidity, because stupidity can also mean a kind of playful innocence, or as in you fool somebody, you trick them, or a play, or so it's a word of many different meanings in Shakespeare. But interesting that we're times, yes, I take what you're saying. I like it that we're times fool, and he's putting love as something that we aspire to, but he's separating it from so rosy, yeah, though rosy lips and cheeks. So that I guess is beauty. That's one image of beauty is rosy lips and cheeks, and rosy also means full of fire, full of blood, full of passion, perhaps full of sexuality. Rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass. So what's the bending sickle, of course, is a classical image of Time the Reaper, right?
yeah, yeah,
You sow, you grow the wheat in time, then you reap it with the
yeah,
sickle. So the,
yeah,
the grim reaper comes along and reaps this body into death, right? Though rosy lips and cheeks within his, so his being time's bending sickle, the bend again bending. There's that word bending again.
yeah,
Interesting. He's brought it back. So what the sickle bends down, the moon bends down, it arcs down towards the earth. Maybe that's enriches the bending of the first line. So time removes us, like with a sickler, the reaper comes in and reaps us, and that's why a bit like we're fools. We're acting like we're going to live forever, but we die. Right? Is that a thought as well? And so we're being a bit foolish. But love is not time's
times.
fool,
Yeah,
though rosy lips and cheeks, the energy of passion within the bending sickle's compass. Compass, what is that? The range, the roundness, the openness. And a
yeah,
bending sickle, it's like almost geometrical measurement. We could look at it that way as well. The realm of measurement, that which can be measured, is
yeah.
perhaps bound by time. Isaac Newton's absolute time. Very interesting. So love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Another semicolon. then once again, the semicolon is a kind of calms us a bit. Like if there's just a comma, it flows more passionately. The semicolon gives a slight pause. Then again, love, another statement above, love alters and there's again a alter. So this is part of time's foolery, right? Just his brief hours and weeks. And as you're saying, Jasper, from the beginning, as you put right at the beginning, this world of the me that impedes, it's this lower self. I think you brought that quite nicely. The poem almost creates this sense of this lower world of time with its brief hours and weeks, and yet we're so involved with it. We're busy blocking the marriage of true minds and many other things, right? So I like how this moment now love alters not. It's like a prayer again. Stillness, isn't it? The stillness of love. Love is both high and guides us, but it's still. It doesn't alter. And this world of alteration is part of its panic, is part of its miserableness, right? Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out. So now bearing coming into it.
Yeah. So
love bears, which is interesting because does a star bear? I guess the star bears the heavens, we could think perhaps, but love, the star was a metaphor for the fixedness of love, but love bears it out. Even to the edge of doom. What's the edge of doom?
Well, I think Shakespeare is trying, right from the beginning, is only talking about this love that is so beyond anything that we can comprehend. The last three lines are interesting because he's just glorifying everything. Now he's taken us to place of doom. And what I see is true love, come what may, it stays as it is, even if things are not right.
Right. So what does this word doom mean to you? What's the flavor of the word doom?
Doom for me is not a very pleasant word. It doesn't sound very pleasant. It doesn't give me strength. It's not pleasant.
The edge of doom.
Yeah, the edge of doom to the very end. The last session we were talking about it. We spoke about how love is when we're waiting for this glory to happen, and then this glorious light is actually blinding us. My experience reading Leonard has always given me this. Leonard talks about how the third act in a man's life is always doom, no matter what. It's always doom. Leonard says that because either you have sickness, and the world has changed.
Doom is a very rich word in the English language.
Yeah.
I think in Tolkien's a very popular voice in modern English. Mount Doom. Mount Doom is the end of the whole journey of the Lord of the Rings. Yeah. So Mount Doom. Of course, doom can be foreboding, but the word also has a destiny in it, doesn't it? It's like that which you cannot change. There's something that's coming. And love is one of the ingredients of this life, and which includes alteration, bending, and rosy lips and cheeks and reaping. And yet there's love, which can bear everything to the edge of doom. So obviously we pray to it because it gives us the strength, does it not? We might say, if my doom is this, I just give up or something like that. So without this kind of love, this fixedness, which is present, right? And remember the poem starts with a kind of let me not, meaning I might, but please let me not admit impediments to this marriage of true minds, because if I don't, then I can bear it out even to the edge of doom, right? So
and somehow he's kind of giving us a balanced approach, saying that doom is a part and parcel of this experience.
Being a bark or wandering bark.
Yeah, I mean that's
so there's some kind of final threshold or barrier, which of course the poem's talking about death, right?
Yeah.
And the bark on a little ship on an ocean we're very fragile. So yes, it's summoning up the difference between those two, and yet praying to love to be my guide. Maybe that's one way we could put it. And then often with the sonnets, the last two lines with the kind of sequential rhyme often switch things on their head in some way, or introduce a new sense that we hadn't thought of before. And that's one beautiful thing about the English sonnet, is you can sometimes have yet another layer of wit that already replaces the wit that's come out before in the final two lines. So let's look at these final two lines, which have always perplexed me, actually. So it'll be interesting to see what you think of it. If this be error, and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved.
I think, I think
That
that's a sign of, he's just signing off saying that this is it. Nobody can contest it. If this is not, then nothing
nope.
exists.
If this is not, nothing exists. Okay, good. I like it. If this be error, so what he said is error, and upon me proved, me. So the me is back again for the first time since the first line. Let me, and now the last line, me is back. So he
Yes.
starts with the first line of this me, then it goes into this prayer to love, and then it comes back saying, if this prayer to love be error, and upon me proved, how would you prove that it was error? That's interesting. What is proof?
I hear these things, I read these things today. We are living in a time, it's post love time, post love era.
Post love.
Yeah, it's like the post truth
Well, it's
era.
post everything. I mean, people love to. Why do people love to throw out this word post for everything? I have no idea, but like
Yeah,
post is a very trendy word, definitely.
yeah, because it is,
You know?
it looks like that because we are in a time where we are very clear that love is waste of time. What I see, what I consume from the media, what I read, what I listen to, I see a lot of very strict way of looking at things. Even self-love. So let's start from self-love. If I do I love myself? I don't know if people are asking those questions, but when you say love, the common understanding of it is loving someone else, or loving something else, loving my father, loving my wife, loving my job, loving what I do. But then this external love is like, this is the proof I find. Like there is no love. I mean, one person very clearly said he's making money out of causing hate on YouTube, creating hate. And when they went and asked him, why are you doing this? He said, this is what gets me money. This is what gets me money. Love does not get me money. If I write love poems or love songs, nobody's interested. But when I write these hate songs, it fetches me money and popularity.
But would that not support the poem in a way? Because the poem is saying love does things for its own sake. It doesn't do it for money, right? The brief
Exactly.
money is the brief hours and weeks, and
Exactly.
it gets reaped. So one could ask this man, well, why do you want money?
Actually, this poem is more truer when I hear these things that are happening because it is a reminder for me that love is eternal. Love is. There's a beautiful song, Love
Yes.
Will Keep Us Alive. That is the thing. Love is what it is. But it's very difficult to love,
Yes.
especially when things are not going your way, when you're not able to take the heights.
So he seems at this point of the sonnets, if we read it, to need a prayer that, oh, let me not.
Yeah.
There's this marriage of true minds taking place. Let me not impede that. Please,
Yeah.
because I want money, or I want. I mean, I don't think it's money in this case, but yes.
In
But I
this,
think this is very interesting, Jasper, what you're saying in related to this proof that perhaps this YouTuber who's saying, well, I do hate because that makes me money. Whereas I talk about love, I don't get any money. Well, maybe he's not talking about love properly, or maybe money is the opposite of love. But it definitely, this poem that he's written, if you spoke this to this man, I don't think his kind of, well, hate makes me money proves that this poem is wrong. It
yeah.
just shows very clearly that money is times fool, right? And love is not times fool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Even
And this, of course.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry for interrupting. Please go ahead.
Oh yeah, I'm just still, that's just, it's such an interesting, so uniquely Shakespearean. This kind of turn of phrase. I never wrote. I never writ. I never wrote. It's like this is so true that if it's proved to not be true, then I never wrote it.
Yeah.
It's such an
Yeah.
interesting thought. Actually, you
Absolutely.
can't. That Shakespeare loves these kind of wit within wit within wit sort of statements that spin around in your mind.
It's like Ayn Rand's Fountainhead. He just demolishes everything for the sake of love. For the sake of love, for the love for what he thinks things should be, either this
Right.
or nothing.
Yeah. So the mood of this poem is kind of alteration, bending, times brief, weeks, hours and weeks. All of this is kind of getting thrown aside in the greatness of love. Yeah, that's this moment. Now, if we read all the sonnets, I told you they change through moods through a long time, but definitely the mood of this sonnet is this great star that guides us, and the stillness of it, and the prayer to let me not
Mess
in
with
mid
it.
impediments. Yeah, let me not mess with it. It's a beautiful, there's a prayer to it, isn't there? That's very interesting. And its seriousness is so double echoed in this last line. If this is error, then I never writ, nor no man ever loved. There's no such thing as love then, if this is error, because this is how love is. And obviously, we can't say that because this will resonate with almost anybody. We might reject it because we're so cynical or we're so into money, or we just, in a way, if love is like this in this poem, then it makes hate seem rather silly. Hate makes me money, or hate, maybe I'm in love with pizza and I want lots of money to buy pizza. So I need my hate so I can make money. But this, I would think almost anyone would cause them to reconsider. At least that seems to be the sentiment of this particular one.
This is it's a beautiful sonnet. Thank you for introducing me to this. After talking to you, you told me that this is quite famous, but I've never read this before. You introduced me to this.
Yes, well, many of the sonnets are very famous. And they touch on all sorts of states of the soul, and they're again one of the most marvelous. Probably the essence of English poetry, just as pure poetry. This obviously isn't drama, but that's the great the power, that poetic power of Shakespeare to somehow body forth the ground of life and the mind in this just huge and yet simple and perfect English of the language. That's what I think anyway. So they definitely repay. I mean, sonnets are a joyful book to have by your bed and just pick them up like this and puzzle over them. Though this one, in a way, perhaps, as I said, in our time, is perhaps more clear. And many of them are, but other ones can be quite perplexing. But that's why I find it very fun to sort of sit with them. And I've never found anything written by Shakespeare that won't eventually bear fruit. You might look at a line for a very long time, or even a certain line for years. Like certain lines from this poem, I've looked at this many times, and yet talking about it with this time, I've seen all sorts of new things that I've never really thought about before. So, and that's why I like this, in a way, either performing a play or talking it over in this way, you really can open up. And I think that's what's supposed to happen. That's what Shakespeare wants. He doesn't want us to sit back and say, oh, well, this is like this or this is like that. He wants us to touch where it came from, where this poetry comes from, and then also put it in our own words. It's creative in that sense.
I really enjoyed this particular sonnet because, I mean, it is just an interpretation. Of course, people can interpret it in many ways, and I've read interpretations of other works of other people. My interpretation is mine. It is very religious to me. It's like my own personal thing. But of course, when we are having this communion where we are sitting and talking about it and taking part in this nourishment, it is interesting to really
very interesting.
Open up and
and that's why I like to stick to it just with the words as much as we can, but we can compare more broadly. And I've always reminded in this, when you're speaking of different things, particularly in the Christian tradition, is of course St. Paul's famous passage on love. Love is patient, love is kind. So of course that was Shakespeare's world as well. So this love is the kind of gathering center point of all his vast oeuvre, is always trying to put that and keep that there's this great fixity and certainty and ever presence of love against which the whole world moves. So the tempest is there, but love is looking on the tempest and never shaken. That, in a way, in just the simplest form, one could say is Shakespeare's entire philosophy. And obviously, that's what he sees as the essence of Christianity as well. All the rest is secondary. It's fundamentally just love. It's just the universe is seen by love. That is the whole very essence of the Christ. Though, of course, Shakespeare never specifically mentions Christ or anything, but it's obviously suffused with that spirit. And the sonnets show it in particularly a terse manner.
In your mandate, in your teaching mandate, do you also think to go into the technicalities of writing a sonnet? Because like every line has 10 syllables.
Oh, yes, of course. One can do that if you to write your own sonnets. Because we live in a very active time, humans of our age are very good at doing things, but they tend to not be so good at listening. And that's just the history of thinking that we're in. So therefore, I find often what's needed and where a lot of our folly comes from, in the sense of being time's fools, is that we don't listen very well. one could say my mandate of teaching Shakespeare anything is to try to bring in the practice of deep listening. That's really where I think a lot of our problems stem from. So my mandate for teaching in a way is just trying to rein in my monkey mind and who I'm with's monkey mind.
How does this lack of listening impact language, Brian? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, it impacts language because we don't really hear language. Language is just something we use for something else. So, as a language is a tool, that's a typical thing people will say to get money or to get this or to get that. As if the whole of nature, the whole of language, the whole of the universe, the divinities, the seas, the oceans, everything is just there for me to use. If you don't mind, can I just read it through one more time after all this talk about it? I'll just read it.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me just do that once. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempest and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, though his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for this.
Thank